I'm very proud to introduce our next speaker, Dan Barker. Dan is the co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation based in Madison, Wisconsin. They are a watchdog organization that helps tag a lot of inappropriate church-state separation violations, and they help us a lot when those things happen in the school systems. They've been a great help as we've been tackling high school problems. They've helped us with college problems. On top of that, Dan is a huge advocate for students and does a lot of work with the Secular Student Alliance, just getting out there and speaking to student groups. In 2008, Dan was our most requested speaker on the Speakers Bureau by a huge margin, and he still goes, I think he spends more time on the road than he spends at home. The vast majority of that is doing talks for Secular Student Alliance affiliates. FFRV has a special fund set up to help make those affordable to your groups. So if you like what Dan has to say today, talk to us because we can get Dan straight to your campus. On top of that, he also has a background in music and is a fantastic pianist with plenty of sacrilegious songs under his belt. So I'm going to have Dan come on up here and take the mic, and please welcome Dan Barker.
Thank you, Liz. Liz is the greatest. Smart, intelligent, kind, informed. What else did you want me to say? Athletic, musical, that's what it was. This is encouraging. I started speaking as an activist for atheism. Well, I did my first public debate in 1985. How old were you in 1985? I came out as an atheist in 1984 and got right to work. The first public thing I ever did in front of an audience speaking for atheism was on Oprah Winfrey's show. I flew 9 months earlier. I had been preaching in the pulpit after 19 years of preaching the gospel. And I was a little bit nervous. I wasn't scared. I'd spoken before huge crowds and I'd been on TV, but I'd never been before a hostile audience before. And Oprah had really packed that audience. It was actually great TV. It was really people with their Bibles under their arms and calling Annie Laurie a witch. In fact, Annie Laurie and I met on that show because I had written an article for Free Thought Today. And we actually have a videotape of the day we met. We've shown our daughter, Sabrina, we've shown her that, and she started laughing, not at how young we looked, but at that audience. And she says, "Are those people crazy?" But it was a lot of fun, and it's a no looking back ever since. But I remember that first debate in 1985, February, I was nervous, doing a debate, a formal public debate. And the first 10 or 12 debates were scary. I was like overanalyzing and thinking, and how's it going, and how can I... But after a while, I just started relaxing. You know, after you've done a few dozen public debates, you realize what's there to worry about. You're not going to say it all in one night. You're not going to convince it. Sometimes you can be like a ship going out into the harbor, overloaded, and you just sink. You're trying to say too much. And since then, it's just been a lot of fun doing debates. So if you want to do debates on your campus, let me know. And there's some other great debaters here as well in the audience who would be happy to put on an event. Debates are good for groups like yours, partly for the PR, but also because if you involve the Christian groups, you can pack the place out. They are good at getting people into the building. In fact, what happened in South Carolina? There was no room for the atheists. They brought in busloads of churches, so be careful of that. But I remember in 1985, 1986, the late 80s, hearing about an occasional student group on campus, and I could have probably counted 5 or 8 groups around the country at that time that had like an organized, skeptical, atheist, free thought group. And we thought that was pretty good. Wow, look at these groups are starting up. But now look at you. Each one of you represents how many students on your campuses. And how many groups are there now with the SSA? 266. 266. So 400 more. And CFI has groups, and there's some groups that are unaffiliated yet with any of the national groups. And what I think is pretty amazing is this is a movement that's really a non-movement. Most movements have followers, But this is a movement with no followers. None of you are followers. You're all leaders. It's not like there's some pope. It's not like August is going to get up and declare himself the Ohio Pope of atheism, and like there's some kind of hierarchy or clergy or something. We're all just the same. We're all just from the bottom up. Each of your groups started because you cared, not because some of us came and said, "Hey, do you want to start a group?" And that's encouraging. That's a real non-movement movement where it's coming from you and from yourself. So it's encouraging to me to see this amazing growth. Part of it, I think, is because of the efforts of groups like ours around the country, but I think most of it is just your own thinking, your own smarts. Whatever it was that happened in Europe, which was a huge religious continent for how many centuries, and today most Europeans are thoroughly secular and non-religious. It wasn't a direct result of some organized atheism. It wasn't like some atheists went over to Europe and started evangelizing. It's just the people themselves, organically from the bottom up, getting tired. And that's happening here in the United States, and you are evidence of that. Your groups and your activities are evidence of that happening. So this is fun to see. And even at the high school level, starting to happen more and more often, so that's great. I was one of those guys on high school campus and college campus that, like Richard Dawkins says in the foreword to my book, Godless, Dan wasn't just a preacher. He was the kind of preacher you would not want to sit next to on a bus. I was that guy. I was so sure. I preached in churches. I played the piano. I stood on park benches. I went into prisons. I walked up to strangers on the street. And where were you guys back then? I mean, where were you skeptic? Why did none of you come up and say something? I bet I met some free thinkers, but you were too scared to say something. It would have done me a world of good to have heard you say a couple of things. For me, if you would have said, "No, the Bible is unreliable, and you can't use that as a basis for truth," that would have been very impressive to me, although I wouldn't have changed my mind. Or morality. You can be good without God, for example. Have you seen the billboards here in Columbus? Have any of you seen them? Yeah. The Freedom from Religion Foundation has been doing a billboard campaign. This is our third campaign. This one's called Out of the Closet, which are billboards in particular cities with the faces and the words of local people. We've had previous campaigns with Imagine No Religion, Beware of Dogma. We've had almost 300 billboards now in the last 4 years up around the country. And here in Columbus, how many were there? About 12? Devin. August and Amanda were on one, the big faces. And but there was one, Dylan Golloff. Did Dylan come to this conference by any chance? No? Okay. Dylan had one that says, very simple, his smiling face, and it says, "I can be good without God." That's hardly inflammatory, isn't it? It's not calling anybody any names. It's just a gentle concept, and nice. We got the billboard company to design it and to put it up, and the billboard company picked the dozen locations, and they're up through this month here in Columbus. And but the billboard company made a mistake. They forgot to check that Dylan's billboard was actually on property owned by a church. And the church, people came to church that Sunday and they saw this sign, "I can be good without God." And the church complained, obviously. In the local newspaper, there was a story of a woman who goes to that church saying, "If we can be good without God, then why are we bothering going to church?" So the church complained and the billboard company moved it. Now, nobody's saying anything, and I'm not either, but it's possible that since he's a person of color, there might have been some other reasons why they didn't like that billboard on their property. But they moved it to another location, which was fine with us. We don't want to get in a fight with the outdoor advertising people. We want them to be friends, and they're private companies. They can put up what they want. They can censor us if they want. And often we will ask people like you to give us 2 or 3 sayings, and sometimes they don't want the first or second one. They'll pick, even Julia Sweeney, the actress, the one she had up in Madison said, "Oh my God, there is no God," which is a great line, but they wouldn't take it. So she had to settle for something else. I read the Bible and became an atheist, something like. But Dylan's was moved to another location, and a businessman at that location complained, and they had to move it again, which we think is great, because each time it was moved, it was more PR, it was more publicity, it was a story. And when churches put up another billboard protesting ours, that's wonderful. It's helping the advertising industry, and they have to mention us again. So, but one of our attorneys, we have 7 staff attorneys in our office, and I'll tell you about a couple of lawsuits we're taking in a second. We always have 5 or 8 lawsuits in the courts, but we have hundreds and hundreds of legal complaints going out. One of our attorneys got to thinking, this church has a billboard on its property, and it's getting income from the billboard. And I wonder if they're paying taxes on that property. So Patrick, I think it was Patrick, did a little bit of research, and turns out they weren't. So guess what? That church is now paying taxes on that piece of property that this commercial billboard is sitting on. So and we happen to know from more than 3 decades of experience that there's an awful lot of violations going around the country about churches and church properties. And Patrick also noticed when he was researching this church, it's just down here south, where is that church? A bit south of here, a couple miles. They also put on their form to the state that this adjoining property they were going to use for a church-run daycare for their members, right? Huge property. Well, Patrick looked into it, and they're not running a church-run daycare. They're just renting out that property commercially, a dentist and other properties, and they are... Patrick thinks it's perjury. They announced that we're using this for religious purposes. And so churches can avoid taxes on any property that's used for religious purposes, but this wasn't. So that's our next step. I think the pastor's going to get a nice letter pretty soon about, not just from us, from the state of Ohio. I'm staying today in a hotel just about a mile or 2 north of here, and yesterday I thought it'd be nice to walk here, because I love to walk, and there's this nice trail that goes through the wetlands. You know what that is? It's really pretty. It goes down by the river. So I decided to walk here, and that thunderstorm hit right in the middle. And I think this is proof that God has really bad eyesight, because the governor of Texas has been praying for rain. And sure enough, it came somewhere. I guess if you pray long enough. I have a song. If there'd been a keyboard here, I would have played for you a song. It's called Nothing Fails Like Prayer. Nothing fails like prayer. Nothing fails like prayer. Use your mind and you will find it. Nothing fails like prayer. But the first verse says, the farmers pray for precipitation, and then they say, in God we trust. Then along comes a drought and dries their crops out and turns their prayers into dust. The next time they need some assistance, they should take the advice of Mark Twain, who said, it's better to check the weather report before you pray for rain. Oh, you'll like the second verse of the song. You reach the final week of the school year, but you haven't studied your best. So you stay up and cram for the final exam and pray for God's help on the test. Then you answer the questions with assurance that the Lord will help you sail through. When the results are returned, what have you learned? God's no smarter than you. So speaking of the governor of Texas, Governor Perry, you probably all know his plans, not his presidential ambitions, but even a higher calling, to be the pastor-in-chief of the state of Texas. Governor Perry has invited and organized this big day of prayer and fasting for Texas to be held next weekend, a week from today, at Reliant Stadium in Houston, Texas. And not only has he been advertising this, he put out a big video that these religious right groups, the American Family Association, which is really it's really a Christian hate group is what it is. It's a right-wing evangelical, Donald Wildman, and now his son, Tim Wildman. And he's associated with a lot of these loonies, right-wing Christian loonies. And not all Christians are loony like that. In fact, in Houston, the Interfaith or something council are protesting, because this is not just a Christian event, it's an evangelical Christian event. And more moderate liberal Christians and Jews and others are feeling frozen out of this. So We've protested it, and we've been talking about it on our national radio show. And we decided that this really was crossing the line. You might know that we sued President Obama over the National Day of Prayer, and we were kicked out of court on standing. The federal court did not say that it's constitutional for Obama to have a National Day of Prayer proclamation. The court simply said, we don't have the right to sue. The door was slammed shut. But we thought with Governor Perry we would have a stronger case because it's not just a non-sectarian, interdenominational, general religion thing, but specific Christian theology, evangelical Christian theology, inviting people to pray. He's saying there are problems in our state that cannot be solved except by spiritual means. He said, well, our country is afloat in a sea of moral relativism, and so we need to come together to pray to Jesus. And so this thing's going to happen next Saturday. We sued. A few weeks ago, we sued seeking a restraining order to enjoin this governor from being involved in his official capacity. We're not saying they can't have their meeting. We're not saying he can't go as a private citizen. We're not saying the governor doesn't have freedom of speech as well. But he was using the seal of the state of Texas. There were robocalls being made to people's homes, and some of our members got them with the governor's voice, inviting them to this meeting for Jesus. In fact, we used them as plaintiffs. There were letters sent out. He invited the governors of all the other states and many other violations of crossing the line. A public servant is supposed to be secular. We sued. We drew a really bad judge, a young, I don't know if he's young, but he's a recently appointed conservative Christian judge. Thursday, the day before yesterday, Annie Laurie, our attorney, and some of the plaintiffs went to Houston for the hearing on that request for a restraining order. And there was a hearing, and then the judge said, I'll be right back. I want to look up something. He came back in with a big typed-up decision. I don't know how he could have had time to make a decision in the meantime. We think he wrote it in advance, but basically saying the same thing that happened to us with Obama, not that Governor Perry has the right to do that, not that it's constitutional, but simply that we don't have the standing to sue. This is happening more and more now. It's not, we can't even get in court to prove it. And I think the judge must know that if we did go to court, it would be so egregious, it would be so bad, that how could he rule for the governor? How could a governor of a secular state be allowed to get up and do that? So basically on Thursday we got the bad news from the bench that the judge just shut the door on us and said, no, you can't sue because you don't have any injury. You're not harmed. It's not coercive. What's the problem? You don't have to go. It's not a big deal, right? Which, by the way, is a very bad argument. It's an argument the Supreme Court has never used. Coercion has never been a part of the standing requirements for the Establishment Clause. It's endorsement. It's the appearance that the government is preferring one religion over another. And to make the point, suppose a governor were to get up and say, we're going to have a day of praying to Allah to the east and fasting, you would bet a lot of Christians would complain about that. They would see right away the injury to them. They would see what it felt like. But they don't think that our feelings, oh, your feelings are hurt. Oh, you poor atheist, because somebody's praying, your feelings are hurt. Is that the reason, enough injury to take a lawsuit? Well, under the U.S. Constitution, the First Amendment, yes, it is. There should be no American citizens whose feelings are hurt by the government on religious grounds. Our government should be neutral on all those grounds. So we're probably going to appeal to the Fifth Circuit, but of course the mootness question will come up, because after next Saturday, the court can say, well, it's been done. What remedy? We can't stop him. It's already been done. So this is kind of what we're up against in the courts. The Supreme Court right now has 6 Roman Catholics on it out of 9. And Sotomayor looks like she's pretty good. As a Roman Catholic, she looks like she's pretty good on state church issues, so she may not be a bad vote as the future goes. So we're keeping cases in the courts. We have about almost 17,000 members nationally now, and we have a student membership rate, and we also have, we don't publicize it, but we also have a hardship rate. So if you really want to join and it's tough, just, we'll sign you up. We're easy about that. We have a student essay contest. You can see in your program, I think it's page 24, last year we gave out over $12,000 in scholarship for students. We have 3 different student essay contests. And we also have student activist awards, including people like Duncan, right? And so, whom you saw. And I think there's 3 or 4 others maybe in this room who received the Student Activist Award. So I think it's been more than $20,000 last year given out to students to your age and at your level. A high school essay, a college essay, and then we have a third one for grad students and older people. Because a few years ago we got this great essay from a college student. It was wonderful. And she won first place. And it turns out she was 49 years old. She was going back to school again. And we thought, wait a minute, we need to kind of separate that. So if you're a grad student, you can enter at that other level as well. It's a $2,000 first prize and $1,000 second prize and so on. So traveling around the country, speaking for Free Thought to student groups is a lot more fun than preaching the gospel. After 19 years of preaching, when I had the good news, when I would go up to you with the good news that Jesus died for your sins, like you'd never heard it before, like you would just be dying to hear from someone like me with a big smile who had peace and understanding that you lacked. You didn't know it, but secretly you were starving for what I had, and I was going to... that's how we felt. We evangelicals really felt like we were doing this wonderful gift to the world. But when you think about the good news, what if I were to go out of my front porch and start yelling to passersby saying, "Hey, there's good news. You don't have to go down in my basement." Really. It's good news. You don't really. Because my son, I sent him down there. It's kind of horrible. There's these chains and hooks, and there's a furnace, and there's these... I built this place, and you really don't want to go there, but there's good news. You don't have to, because my son went down there, and you then get to come in here and live with me up in the attic. Isn't that great? Would you keep walking? I used to preach that the good news was that Jesus died for our sins, that because without God there's no purpose and there's no meaning in life. And that's a big deal you hear from evangelicals. What's your meaning in life? Why are you here? What's your purpose of life? Well, I'm happy to say that there's better news. As an atheist evangelist, and I like the word evangelist because in the Greek it simply means good news. The word angel just means messenger. So there's even better news than their good news. And that is, and this is something to be proud of, this is something to be excited about. The good news is that there is no purpose of life. That's great news. Because if there's a purpose of life, then we are secondary. We are servants. We are members of an army. We are slaves before a master. We are looking outside of ourselves to someone to tell us where we fit in. What are my marching orders? What is my purpose? The great news is there's no purpose of life, that life is its own reward. Just being alive is its own reward. And if you need more than that, you're not living your life. You're living somebody else's life. You're an actor in someone else's play, in another drama. The good news is that you are the director. You are the writer. You are the person with this one life to live. To say that there's no purpose of life is not the same as saying that there's no purpose in life. There's plenty of purpose in life. Who would dare say that Elizabeth Cady Stanton had no purpose in her life? Look how she devoted a half a century to women's rights. She was an atheist who worked tirelessly, who said, our biggest enemy, you know what the biggest enemy to women was, she said? The Bible. That darn Bible is being thrown at us all the time, and she fought against it. Who's to say that Margaret Sanger had no purpose in life? She found something to fight for. Bertrand Russell or Carl Sagan or name it. Name all the people who have not believed in God and yet have enriched the world in so many ways. When you're graduating, some of you will march down to Pomp and Circumstances by Elgar. Did you know he was a non-believer? At the end of his life, he was born Catholic but became a non-believer. Somewhere over the rainbow. Yip Harburg was a non-believer who wrote that song, the lyrics of that song. Brahms's Lullaby. Look how our lives have been enriched in science and in the arts and in the movies and in literature and in reform. My newest book is called The Good Atheist, Living a Purpose-Filled Life Without God. And I detail more than 300 people who have lived lives of immense purpose without believing in a God. And it's because they found a problem to solve. As long as there are problems to solve, and you can find them, and sometimes they just spring on you. Maybe your brother dies of some disease, and I'm going to fight that disease. Or maybe it's inequality, maybe it's oppression, maybe it's corruption, maybe it's hunger, maybe it's children, maybe it's the environment, whatever. There are a lot of problems in this world, and as long as there are problems to solve, there is purpose in life. What I'm impressed with a lot of the groups that I've talked to around the country, you SSA groups, that you're not just all sitting around saying, there's no God, there's no God, nope, there's no God. This is what you do. I mean, how boring is that? Many of you are actually doing things. You're working on solving problems. You're getting out there. You're showing what Dylan said on his billboard. We can be good without God. Well, duh. This church that took down the billboard has proved to us that they can't be good with God. They're violating laws. They're hypocritical. They're cheating the government. They're making you pay more taxes because they think they have all these great breaks. So find a problem, work on it, be proud of the fact of the good news that there's no purpose of life, and let's trumpet that, and let's continue to improve. I kind of feel like, and maybe some of you feel the same way, we're not really making anything happen. We're kind of riding this wave of what's happening. It's amazing how the country seems to be turning. Historically, you will probably be looking back in 20, 30, 50 years and noticing that this was a corner that was being turned, and you got to be part of that. It's really exciting. I couldn't have said that back in the 80s. We didn't know about what was going to be happening with this generation of 25 to 30% of the teen to 20-year-olds are non-believers of some sort or other, and that's incredible. So I applaud you, encourage you to keep working to solve problems and to keep state and church separate. Thanks.